Hello, friends, and welcome back to Weird Wednesdays, which is ironically coming out on a Thursday due to some technical difficulties. As always, Tattooed Biker here with you, and tonight I have true stories from viewers, emails, that are just a mixed bag of strange beings and high strangeness on deck. So grab your GPS, we're going off-road tonight. Now, let's ride. Number 1. Hey TB, this happened back in the 1980s, and I was around 10 years old. I was an only child, and my mom was a single mom. She had taken all the money she had and bought a trailer with some land and moved out to the country. We lived in a rural area in East Arkansas on a 2-acre tract. Houses were sparse and situated quite far apart, so not a very populated area. My mom was busy with something in a room which was situated at the far end of the 72-foot trailer we lived in. I went into the kitchen for something and I heard a knock at the door. I went to open it and found some kids standing outside, 2 boys. I opened the screen door and the larger of the two asked, "Can we use your phone? We need to call our mom." I was immediately suspicious because where did these kids come from? I'd lived here a few years and I thought I knew all the kids in the neighborhood. I remember looking at the older boy's eyes and thinking that something was different about him, but I just couldn't put my finger on it. I later realized it's because his eyes were solid black. I just shrugged and opened the screen wider and let them in. I left the front door open as I took them into the kitchen and pointed to where the phone was. The larger boy picked up the phone as my mom called out to me. I ran into her room and she asked, "Who's in the house?" So I told her a couple of kids wanted to use the phone. She looked angry and said, "Don't you ever let anyone in this house without checking with me first. Tell them to leave." I walked out of her room and back to the kitchen to tell them they had to go. That's where I found the phone off the hook. The front door was still open and the screen door closed, and I ran to the door and looked outside for the kids. They were nowhere to be found. They couldn't have had time to walk or run across 2 acres to get to the street, so where did they go? After that happened, life was super weird. Mom was always getting sick and unable to find sustainable work. She became heavily paranoid and got into damaging relationships with men. Of the most weird occurrences were when she didn't have the ability to pay the phone bill. So the phone company came and disconnected the line. However, we were still getting phone calls. I rarely ever answered the phone, so when Mom told me this, I was skeptical and didn't really believe her. Then one day she was busy outside and the phone rang, so I answered it. I heard a woman say, "Hello," on the other end. It sounded like my aunt, and then it just suddenly went to static. When Mom came back in, I told her what had happened. She went to a neighbor's and called the phone company and asked them to check the line, that our phone was still ringing. They came out, inspected the line at the pole, then came inside and told my mom that there's no way you're getting phone calls. The line is completely disconnected. It's cut off at the pole. This happened constantly, even after Mom moved the trailer to another city. In that city, she had failed to pay the bill again, and the phone got disconnected. But we kept getting phone calls that ended in dead air, or strange voices, and then static. Their linesman told her the same thing, that there was no way our phone was ringing, but yet it did. To this day, I really don't know what to make about any of that. But it was also around this time that I began to experience things like words of knowledge and clairvoyant experiences, where I would know things that I'd never learned. I'd hear things before they happened in physical reality. I mostly kept those experiences to myself and would just think that it was weird. When Mom sold that trailer, we never had those weird phone experiences again, and the clairvoyance also went away. Something had happened to that trailer after those kids had come in the door. Here are a few other experiences that I remember. While still living in the country, I was sitting on Mom's bed next to her. She was saying, "It feels like bugs are crawling all over me." I got off the bed and walked over to her dresser and for some reason just felt the need to look up. On the ceiling there were millions of tiny spiders. This is no exaggeration. I knew my mom would freak out, so I told her, "Mom, please get up and leave the room." She looked at me with a look of concern and asked why. I said, "Please, just get out of the room, Mom." She then gave me a look like I was being impossible. So I told her, "Look up." I've never seen her leave a room so fast after she looked up and saw that mess. We fumigated the house directly after that several times a year, and I have never seen anything like that before or since. After we had moved the trailer to another city, some lights would either dim or get brighter and brighter when we turned them on, until they would literally pop. When Mom called the electric company, they sent an electrician out to inspect it. He climbed the pole, and when he went to test one of the lines, it literally popped him off the pole and he flew to the ground. He was okay, thankfully, although a little shaken. The electric company's stance on the issue was that there was a miswiring at the pole. It was most likely that they missed the ground. Again, it could be unrelated, but the circuit breakers never tripped during any of these episodes. Anyways, I just wanted to share. Signed, Alec. Number 2. Dear TB, I've been employed at a few different state parks in my time, but for the last 12 years I've been a park ranger at the Great Smoky Mountain National Park in western North Carolina. I just retired this past fall, but I do miss quite a lot of things about my work. One spring, something happened there that I wasn't prepared for at all. I've always been very attuned to the sights and sounds around me, and though I'm cautious, I've rarely been afraid of much out there. The summer before, we had a remarkably calm season. There were hardly any animals that we had to deal with, and it seemed the bears and other pests were leaving everyone alone. That next April, people started to hear noises around their campsites late at night. These sounds would drive their dogs insane, but nobody had really seen anything unusual. It kind of felt like whatever it was probing and checking out the area nightly, but was staying far enough away that we couldn't see it with our spotlights. Then one night, when I was walking back to my quarters, I started feeling a profound sense of dread and unease. There was the most creepy, malevolent feeling in the air. So I looked around and scanned the tree line before looping around towards my door. I scanned the area from left to right and from my fire pit to the table. About 20 feet behind the table, I saw a naked, extremely pale, almost gray figure. There was this big boulder behind it, so it was kind of blending in and not so easy to see. If I hadn't been purposely looking, I never would have noticed it. The thing had a very humanoid quality to it. It was very lanky and standing still. It was directly facing me. Then our eyes met, and I could just feel my heart drop. I just went cold. I probably only stared at it for a few seconds, but it felt like several minutes while my brain was trying to process what it was that I was seeing. It stood between 5 and 6 feet tall, and the shoulders were low and slumped. The body was frail and thin, emaciated even, and it was crouched down on all fours. I couldn't make out many details of the face beyond its enormous black eyes. But its mouth seemed to be open and making these strange clicking sounds. It's kind of hard to describe. The fear and shock that came over me was terrifying, and I suddenly couldn't think rationally at all. I slowly pulled my phone out of my pocket and I snapped a photo that seemed to startle it. I watched it jump up onto the massive rock and then climb the tree next to it. The speed that it showed was both astounding and terrifying. I then ran like my life depended on it the rest of the way back to my cabin. I grabbed my shotgun and loaded it, then aimed it at the door. I simply sat there with my heart hammering away, just waiting for the doorknob to turn or the window glass to break. I even called for backup. I sat there and waited for what seemed like hours for two of my colleagues to finally show up. I must have sounded like a blithering idiot trying to describe what I had seen and what happened. I was usually really calm and collected, which is probably what made them believe me. The three of us were all armed, and we went out together to go look for it. We stayed out into the early morning, expecting to see or hear something, but we never did. Eventually, at around 4 a.m., we lowered our guard and went to my cabin to try and get some sleep. The next morning, I could hardly believe what I'd seen the night before. I kept obsessively searching the area in the daylight to see if there were any shapes or items that I might have mistaken for the creature. But the only things around were my typical campsite things. I really wished that there could be another witness for validation. I had to make my report, but I had so little substance that I felt ridiculous. I mean, there were no sightings by anyone else, and no one had been harmed. There were only the strange noises that people and dogs had been hearing, and my one sighting, so what could I really say? The photo that I'd taken was dark and grainy, and you could barely make out the rock, let alone the creature. I kept watching it that night to see if I could spot anything, but there was nothing. The thought that this thing could be out there, just observing us, was really unnerving. It was also hard to want to warn people, but to not really have anything concrete to say to them. I attempted to have the photo analyzed by several professionals, but the pixelization and the darkness made the photo useless. Thanks for letting me share. Signed, Gary. Number 3. Hey, Tattooed. What I'm about to describe happened to my father. I hesitated sending it. I thought this one was just too wild, so no one would believe it. It's probably a pretty long one, too. It happened in southeastern Austria in 1975 or 76, when my father was 9 or 10 years old. It was during the summer holiday, and my father and his friends had lots of free time to spare. They decided to go to a particular spot where they knew that wild strawberries were growing in abundance. It was outside the village on a small hill. There, on top of that hill, there's a big ditch. I don't know the geological name of that structure, but I guess it's formed by collapsing ground. It's a very long ditch, about 50 meters long, with a very steep walls about 10 meters deep. Even at the bottom, there's no water in it. So my father and his two friends drove there and started to pick up the strawberries, which resulted quickly to being pretty boring for these kids, so they decided to spice things up by making a competition of which one of them could get more strawberries. This way, they quickly carved out his own way around the ditch, trying to win. After some time, my father spotted a place with a lot of strawberries. It was for him like hitting a jackpot. He could easily win with all the fruit that he saw there. And so he started collecting them fast. He was totally consumed by that and unaware of the surroundings when he suddenly felt someone grab his foot and pulled it sharply. Naturally, his first thought was that it must be one of his friends, who also saw that spot rich in strawberries. In a typical young boy's way, he wanted to pull him away. My father turned to face him, laughing, but what he saw instantly paralyzed him. It wasn't his friend, but there was a creature sticking out from his chest up from a hole in the ground. And it was holding my father's foot by the shoe. My father described it as human-like, naked with pale and dirty skin, but the weirdest thing was its head. While the torso looked human, the head didn't. My father called it a horseman because of its head. It had human-like eyes, but the face was very long, like a horse. It had a horse-like mouth full of horse-like teeth. The creature held one of my father's feet with both hands with anger in its human-like eyes and exposed its big horse-like teeth like an angry dog ready to bite. It tried to pull him into the hole that it stuck up from. My father was completely paralyzed by fear, and he couldn't speak or scream. After that thing pulled him closer and closer to its hole, my father began to kick its head with his other free foot. The creature pulled him both-handed, but at his kicks it had to release one of its hands to try and grab the other foot that was kicking. This way my father somehow managed to free his foot from his shoe, and he was free from the creature's grasp. According to him, the fight felt like an eternity, but was most likely only a few seconds long. He then quickly ran. He ran away as far as he could from that place. His friends later told him that they didn't see any struggle, but they only noticed that something was happening, and then he ran out. My father was still shocked, just running. He ran past his own house and entered the main road, still running like mad. He was then spotted by a woman, a friend of his parents, rushing back home from the store. She saw him rushing in the middle of the road, which made her angry at how dangerous and irresponsible he was. She shouted at him, but quickly noticed that there was something wrong with the kid, so she quickly crossed his way and grabbed him. His eyes mad in fear, he didn't recognize her and tried to free himself to run. She then spotted the bloody footprints he left on the tarmac as he had cut his foot while running barefoot without a shoe. She then understood that there was something really wrong and dragged him to his house, where he calmed down after a few hours. He never told his parents what really happened. Later, his older brother returned to that place to recover his shoe and basket for the strawberries. Both were found ripped up into small pieces. But that's not quite the end of the story yet. But before I proceed, I want to add that my father is dead serious about what he saw that day. It was definitely a creature sticking out of a hole in the ground. It had a human-like body with pale skin and a horse-like head, but very human eyes that he still remembers as full of rage. It is also not a creature that he has ever seen, and it isn't something we're familiar with in our folklore. But now, on to my part. Years later, he told me the story, and I browsed some internet forums about something unrelated. I read about World War II German experiments and secret weapons. A very common topic here in this part of the world and full of conspiracy theories. One of them talks about an Uberstadt. This was supposed to be a werewolf-like creature. Because of that, each time I hear you guys or any Americans talking about the sightings of Dogman, I can't help but smile. We had those stories here after the Second World War. Several people claim to have seen a werewolf out in the forest. It's an interesting topic on its own, full of stories, sightings, creature descriptions, etc., even of soldiers fighting one of them. However, I was very skeptical about it when reading it, so I decided to look at other users' comments to see what they think about it, and one of them caught my attention. One of the people commenting described something that happened to his uncle when he was young, related to World War II German hybrid experiments. When he was a child, his uncle was playing alone under a bridge when something grabbed his foot. It was sticking up from a hole in the ground, a man with a horse-like face. I was completely shocked. It was so similar to my father's story. I tried to send a private message to that user, but apparently he wasn't active anymore and never replied. But here I found another person from the opposite side of the country with a similar story. Before that, I thought my father's story was unique, and neither me nor him had ever heard of anyone describing something. Yet here it was. Fast forward a couple years later, a YouTuber made a video in the form of an iceberg of European cryptids. And there it was, World War II German human-animal hybrid experiments. There were reports that those beings were seen in forests near former German bases after the war. It was either werewolves or dogmen or hogmen or even horsemen. Humans with horse heads. Finding this out, and that what my father saw might be something more, and that there were other people seeing similar things, chilled my bones, and that is why I've decided to send you this story, even if it sounds unreal and a little too crazy. I believe in my father, and what he saw now more than ever. Cheers, and keep up the good work. Greetings from Austria. Signed, Hans. And there it is. 3 true stories from our community from around the globe. I really hope you enjoyed hearing these stories as much as I enjoyed reading them. If you have a story to share, just send it to the email in the description, and your experience might end up in a future video. Thanks for watching. And as always, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.